Yes. So podcast art is one of the first things you do when you are launching a new podcast. And of course, you have to think about the title of your podcast. And that, of course, is going to go on the podcast art. So there are a tons of things to think about when creating your podcast art, or even when you're rebranding your podcast art, because you can make changes whenever you want when you create a podcast. You're not stuck in. So let's go through all the moving pieces, why you need one. Do I need to incorporate my branding? What words should I have on there? What kind of imagery? What are the sizes? What are the specs? What are the right things to do, the wrong things to do? And where am I going to get it created? Who's going to make it for me? So I'm going to go through all of those things during this episode. So why do we even have podcast art in the first place? Well, first of all, yes, iTunes does require it. And of course, you need to have an image that represents your podcast, almost like a book cover, right? For your book. And it piques people's attention. It lets them know what the show is, what it's about, is it for them, and has the ability, especially when imagery is being used and it captures someone's attention, it makes people want to listen, want to check it out, want to subscribe. And it gives information to the audience in a really quick way. Because when you think about it and you are in like iTunes or other apps and you see all those different podcast arts, some naturally, grab your attention and some don't. And so it is important to really optimize this, thing that's like a first impression. It's the first thing you're going to see when you discover a new podcast. And so one of the big questions I get when I'm launching podcasts with clients is, does it have to look exactly like my logo? And my answer to that is no. It doesn't have to exactly look like your logo. Like if you look at my podcast, Leverage Your Podcast, it does not have my logo in there. I did not want the sailboats. I did not want it to look exactly like that. I wanted it to fit more about what the show was about. And so I had that scale to really showcase leveraging, and obviously have a podcast mic in there and so forth. But you do want it to fit in with your brand, because podcasting is not a separate piece of your marketing. You don't want it to, sit on the side as a silo, its own separate thing. You always want to have all of your marketing efforts be in sync and work with each other to meet your goals. So you're going to use the same fonts. You're going to use the same similar colors. Like if it's the same colors, then maybe just a couple of them. You don't have to use them all as your business. And then that way too, there's a natural correlation between your podcast and the business that you're trying to grow through podcasting. So you'll notice mine has the gray, but it also has the blue and the yellow in it as well. That's on my website. So it still goes, not exactly the same, but it goes. It still flows in with my branding. Some podcasts I've seen have incorporated their logo, or it's like their logo kind of bigger with the titles on it, like it just sits in the background. You definitely can do that for brand recognition as well. It just kind of depends what your show is on, how niche it is, and so forth, different factors. If on your website and in your branding, you have numerous colors or numerous fonts, you definitely want to stick to only a couple of them. If there are a few fonts being used within the titles and the words that are on the podcast art, it's going to get too busy. Clean always wins versus something that is very intricate, has a lot of moving pieces on it, and a lot of text. Speaking of text, we're going to touch upon that next. So on the podcast art, I definitely recommend looking in iTunes or one of the apps and going through and scrolling through, because you will naturally see, oh, that doesn't work. Oh, I like that. That stands out from the other ones, because you really do want to make sure that you stand out. You also want to make sure that it's very clear on who it's for or what it's about. So like if your podcast, I'm trying to think of some podcasts right now. I can't, they're not coming to mind. If it's like the, I don't know, true crime review show, then people know it's for true crime lovers, and they know if they're a true crime lover, then it's for them. And if it's saying review show, then you know what to expect, right? You know that the host or whoever are going to be doing reviews of different true crime shows. So it's very important to be very clear. Being too clever ends up being confusing. So if you're like trying to be like cutesy or like acronyms, or like even if you say the podcast chat, or I don't know, sometimes it's like you can see titles and you're like, that's so vague, I don't even know what it's about. And then if you don't know what it's about and you don't know if it's going to help you or it interests you, you're just going to keep swiping and find a podcast that you do resonate with and that you do want to listen to and check out. The other item too is not to have too many words on the podcast art. Some podcasts do have like a short, like a title. And then some also have a podcast like a tagline. And it's okay to have a tagline. Like if I happen to say like the Leverage Your Podcast show to help produce, publish, promote your next podcast, or if I had that tagline, then I would put that on my marketing materials or like on the, in the description of the podcast or on my webpage about the podcast. But I would not have all of that text on the podcast art. There's just simply not enough real estate for it. And when you're, in those apps, that artwork is so small, you're not going to be able to read it. And if people are scrolling and there's too many words and it's too busy, they're just going to keep going, honestly. So you want to make sure that you're really crisp and concise, and the less words, the better. So yeah, so definitely the less, the better. Now, the next thing you want to think about is the imagery, or like the look of it, right? So you can have it like be like artwork, like some of them are super simple, right? With like a blue background, yellow words, and it's just very graphic. That's totally cool. And they are striking and they do grab attention, especially if there's not a lot of words and the colors really have that nice contrast. So you do want to choose your colors carefully. Like if you had a podcast art that was like a whole bunch of soft, creamy, pink, beigey colors, it may look beautiful as artwork, but if you're, scrolling through, it's just going to be a little washed out, right? It's not going to grab someone's attention. Again, it's finding that fine line, right? Of like your branding, having something that is striking and stands out. Because obviously you don't want to use like neon yellow or something and it has nothing to do with your brand. So it's just finding that fine line and just keeping that in the back of your mind when you are creating it. Now, when it comes to more like graphics, photographs that are like in the background, people are naturally attracted to other people. So if you're doing a solo show and it's just you talking about, your topic and your area of expertise, then a picture of you in that image is great. Or, that's always grabbing people's attention, and people, you look at someone, right? And I don't know, you get a feel for them, like whether like or trust them. You get a feel for people by looking at them. It's just the way it is. And so that's an option. If that's not for you, or you have a lot of guests, then I wouldn't recommend having the picture of you on it. But you can have imagery that represents what the show is about or who it's for. So like if it's about cars, you'll likely are going to have some imagery showcasing cars on the graphic, because car people are going to be like, ooh, car. Oh, look, that show's about cars. Yay, I'm going to listen. So that kind of thing. So you really want to keep that in mind. Avoiding clutter. Again, I think I've mentioned this already, but you don't want something to be hard on the eyes and it's like super busy. You want it to pack a punch and grab their attention. And again, I'll say it again, probably a few times in the next few minutes, but like the imagery of the cover art, that square cover art is really small. So you want it to be really clear. And I do want to mention quickly too about the words when you're creating it is make sure the words aren't going super close to the edge. You want to kind of give those words some breathing room, right? Some white space around it. So don't pack everything in. And if you are using photographs or that kind of imagery in your podcast art, please make sure it's high res, really crisp, high quality images. And stay clear of like adult and controversial imagery. You don't want to violate terms, and you certainly don't want to put people off. It's just not a good idea. And make sure that you have the rights to those images. You can't just, Google cars and then grab an image and use that for your podcast, because you will get dinged and you will probably have Getty Images coming after you or whatever. So if you are using images of XYZ, then go to like iStock Photo, or I think there's Dreams Photo. There's a whole bunch of stock photo sites, and then you can buy the image and then you have the right to use it in your marketing and your podcast. So that's my advice on that. Next is episode art. A lot of podcasters skip episode art, and it kind of makes me want to cry a little. Because you don't want to use the same image over and over and over for every episode that you have. You want to distinguish between the episodes, because you're going to use that episode art. And I'll kind of go into sizes and specs a little later, but I use Facebook ad size. So it's like 1200 by 628, I think it is, but it's the size that goes into my WordPress post. So my blog post, and fits as a featured image. And that's also going to be the image that I use for Facebook and LinkedIn to share the episode. And so most episode graphics will have, sometimes people have the episode number on it. I prefer not to, but definitely have the title, so that when people are on the blog post or on social, they're going to know instantly what it's about. If you're having guests on the episode, you're going to want to say who the guest is, what their name is, or their area of expertise, or what they're known as. So like the sales maven, Nikki Roush. Shout out, Nikki. She's great. She's been on my show before as well. And then if you're having a guest on the show, you're likely going to want their headshot or an image of them on the episode, on the graphic as well, right? And then I also create a square size for the episode for Instagram, of course. And then it's super easy, especially if you're using Canva, to resize. So you can like resize it for Twitter, or resize it for LinkedIn, and so forth. So that way you basically have like a template for a horizontal version that you can resize, and a version that is square. And of course, you're going to want that image as well to send the guest, right? So that they can promote the episodes. So definitely need to have episode graphics. Now, I did touch upon the sizing for the graphic that I have inside the website. So I say Facebook ad size because that's the name of it in Canva, honestly. And yes, it's 1200 by 628. Now the podcast cover art, so the main one that goes in iTunes and so forth, iTunes has a stipulation of it being 1400 by 1400. So you have to have that art size or it's not going to work properly. But you totally can make an 1800 by 1800 version for your website or Instagram or wherever else you're using. Just know that you need to have 1400 by 1400 size for iTunes. And so again, using the episode art and make the different sizes for different social media platforms. Now, if you are pushing your podcast from your host, so Libsyn or wherever, to YouTube, and what I mean by that is they use a static image. It's married with the audio. So it kind of like it plays like a video, but it's just a static image and then you hear the episode. So that means you will need to upload to Libsyn or whatever host you're using a YouTube thumbnail sized episode art image. And that is 1280 by 720. And yeah, so you can have a different, like slightly different version for YouTube if you want. It's all good. I upload the video version of my podcast to YouTube. And so I do just use the regular image that I have for the episode art, but you can totally make like a different funky version in Canva if you want. It's all good. The world is your oyster. Now, who is going to create this artwork for me, Lindsay? Is probably what you're asking. It is super easy to create it yourself. Canva has amazing templates, and then obviously you rejig the colors and the fonts and what have you. But not everyone is super techie. Not everyone has an eye for graphic design, and that's okay. You can hire out. You can even hire someone on like Fiverr. But what gets tricky is if you get them to design the cover art, then you're also going to need a template to create your episode art on a week-to-week basis. There's also 99 Designs as well that creates anything, logos, whatever. They can create an image for you as well. I just recommend getting the design file for it, and then someone can create that episode version, unless they create like an episode version where there's like a placeholder for the guest or like a blank space. And blank space where the title and the guest name would go. You could always upload that to Canva because then it's just the background and you're superimposing the title and the guest on top of that. So that's always a workaround. Many podcast agencies, like myself, for instance, when we're doing podcast launches, we create the podcast artwork, the episode version and the Instagram or the Square episode version as well. So that's all part and parcel to our launch that we do for our clients. So I hope that helps you kind of wrap your head around what kind of images to have when you're launching a podcast, what you're going to have to think about when you're designing it. And for those that are already podcasting and like, you're like, okay, but I've already got my podcast art. But what if it's not doing you justice, right? Like, what if it is turning people off or confusing people more than attracting listeners? So you can keep the same name of your podcast, if it's working. You may want to rejig that too. That's totally cool. You can rebrand your podcast whenever you want. Honestly, I've had 3 different podcasts. It's all good. Gives it a new lease on life. You don't want to keep going and keep turning out podcast episodes if it's not attracting your audience and it's something's missing, right? So you can totally rebrand the title, rebrand the images, and then you don't have to change anything in your host. You can even do like a marketing blitz for the next few weeks and woohoo, I'm rebranding my podcast, new look, tweak the title, whatever it is. And then because really you want to make sure that you're on brand, you want to make sure that podcast listeners can tell what the show is about, it captured their attention, that they want to listen and they want to subscribe and be a loyal listener. So you can definitely do changes at any time. So if this was helpful for you, I would love for you to search for Leverage Your Podcast on iTunes or Podchaser, and please give me some feedback. I would greatly appreciate that. And if you haven't yet launched a podcast and you're like, okay, Lindsay, this helped me with the artwork, I can visualize it, but you still have all the other moving steps to take. I do have a podcast launch guide, so you can go to smoothbusinessgrowth.com/free and you'll check out my resources there. Of course, we do it all for you as well, so you can always reach out to us there. So have a great day and happy podcasting.